Hello, guys. Nice to officially meet you, Jadd. And my name is Hyan.
Hello, hello.
And yeah, I just to start off, like, could you guys let us know like how you and like you met each other? I know you guys both go to the same school, like Elijah and Jadd. But if you want to, tell us, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to let Jadd take this one because every interview we always like to allocate this question to him because he's the expert on it. So yeah, go ahead, Jadd.
Well, first of all, it's good to talk with you and to have all of us in this one space. Elijah and I met over a year and a half ago at this point. Elijah and I are both students at the University of Texas, and Elijah had founded Atidna back in 2022, prior to when I was actually at UT, and I hadn't known Elijah, but Elijah and I actually have a mutual friend of ours who was at UT, but also was somebody who grew up in the same area that I did in the Dallas area. And we actually went to the same high school. And so we're very much kind of hometown buddies, me and this friend of both of ours, Elijah and I. And
Mhm.
she connected Elijah to me because she knew that I was Palestinian and that Elijah was Jewish, and that she wanted to have our relationship kind of be fostered from that, because Elijah had always wanted to do peace work between Jews and Palestinians specifically, and she thought that it would be a great idea to get me connected with him. And so, about a year and a half ago, Elijah and I found each other just off social media. We then met. And ever since then, it's been just kind of on this roller coaster together, just running the Atidna train. And since then, yeah, a year and a half later, we're still doing our thing. Elijah now handing off the presidency of Atidna at UT to myself, while he remains the president of the overarching international organization. And we've been able to foster great connections through our friendship, and we've been the best of friends ever since.
100%.
That's great, man. That's really nice to hear. And yeah, I really admire like when I first met Elijah, just to recap, it was just the same thing. Like, I mean, we kind of just met off social media basically, and through that we did an interview recently, which you could check out on your like after you're done this video. And yeah, just basically like we got to talking over time and just saw like a lot of our views align and yeah, so just wanted to based off of like how great that conversation was, I wanted to maybe like open up a communication with you as well and based on because Elijah said that you guys kind of also agree on a lot of the same things and yeah, and I really admire like the idea of a tidna and how you guys can actually sit down with people that like you normally wouldn't sit down with and someone that you may not even feel safe around and just have like very
Sure.
very difficult conversations and let them play out and with emotions and all and
Yeah.
like I don't know how you guys do it. I personally would walk out like most of the time. So yeah, like I admire
Yeah.
your bravery and like your patience especially.
That means the world, man. I mean, trust me, a lot of people do want to walk out of the conversations, but I think over time they learn that if you stay long enough, you'll eventually find agreement, and that is the path to peace. So I think that's the driving force for a lot of us, and hopefully we can expand this to more than just Israel, Palestine. Hopefully, there's a variety of issues across the Middle East, Syria, beyond even the Levant that really need discourse, very hearty discourse, to really get to the heart of these issues, and hopefully we can find common ground.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and in light of like the recent liberation of Syria with Assad finally being gone and now like Lebanon has just elected a new prime minister and I think another and a president as well.
Yeah.
And so like there's been a lot of talk of like a renewed fresh leadership in the Middle East that could like change a lot of the dynamics. So in light of those like events, yeah, it's just a really exciting time for our region, for Palestinians, for Syrians, for Lebanese people, for Jordanians,
Hmm.
which is what we kind of want to center our conversation about, like the region of Levant and the politics of Levant. And
Yeah.
yeah, also like I know Palestinians have been rioting against Palestinian Authority. If anyone wants to explain more about that, I haven't taken a closer look at it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can both hit on this issue because it's something me and Jad have commented on a lot. The
Hmm.
PA as a whole was constructed in the post-Oslo period, and it's specifically viewed, especially amongst Palestinians, as a creation of Israel. It's something for Israel to implement its will in the West Bank. And ever since its inception, post-Oslo, the PA and the PLO in general have had an agreement to put down their arms, to not engage in violent resistance. But not all Palestinians in the West Bank follow that line. Many Palestinians say, no, we want to continue to resist occupation. The West Bank is occupied under international law. We have the right to resist violently and non-violently, and we will utilize whatever means we can. The PA does not follow that line. So there are places like Jenin, Nablus that are hotbeds for violent resistance that the PA, not Israel, the PA will go in and clamp down on. And that causes a lot of internal strife amongst Palestinians, especially in the West Bank. And so recently, there was a group called the Jenin Brigades that the PA basically went in and arrested a ton of people. And that sparked clashes between the PA and Jenin Brigades. It also caused condemnation from Hamas and other organizations across the Palestinian spectrum to basically say the PA is being very repressive against its own people and specifically carrying out the wills of Israel before the wills of the Palestinian people. And so overall, PA is not very popular in the West Bank, especially. I think their approval ratings lower than 25% now amongst West Bankers. In Gaza, it's more popular because Gazans don't necessarily like Hamas as much because Hamas is repressive to Gazans. Palestinians have a trend to hate whoever governs over them. And so in the case of the West Bank, the PA is very repressive. And so, in the case of the West Bank, PA is very repressive, so West Bankers don't like the PA.
It's the incumbency effect. Like whoever is your
Yeah,
incumbent, you just hate them, you want to shit on them, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, to a T. Yep.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
I don't have too much else to comment really. As Elijah said, the PA is largely viewed amongst Palestinians as, a Western-backed and Israeli-backed, not even, not really government, but kind of some semi governmental body that really is a dictatorship, if anything. Obviously, Mahmoud Abbas, was elected to a 4-year term and has been serving that out into his 20th year. And he's obviously incredibly unpopular, and for many good reasons. He is viewed as a traitor. He's viewed as a collaborator. He is somebody who openly, if Palestinians are revolting, whether it be against the PA or against Israel, he will shut it down. Obviously, what we saw in Jenin, you saw Palestinians who felt that their own kind of armed struggle was the proper way to free themselves, and that was obviously shut down as well. And what I always tell people, of course, is I'm not going to sit here and blame the people of Jenin for having that resentment. I mean, life in the West Bank right now, sure, it's not Gaza, where I mean it's just total hell on earth. But in the West Bank, kids who are born there, they're told that from their own parents that, you know, they don't know if there is going to be a future for them because things aren't good there. The economy has collapsed. The leadership is almost non-existent. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Benjamin Netanyahu is the prime minister of the West Bank. I mean, he is basically who has effective rule over there. Obviously, you can talk about, areas A and B. Frankly, I don't even care about Area B. Area B is not under Palestinian control, even though people may try to tell you that off of the Oslo agreements. But Area A is the only part of autonomy that Palestinians have in the West Bank. And obviously, for many Palestinians, it's this incredibly suppressive regime that doesn't actually take into account a lot of their needs. And there are many protests that have happened against the PA, mostly a lot of them being economic protests, but they quickly get shut down. And so what I always tell people, is it's very sad for Palestinians because you have in Gaza, you have Hamas, which is very unpopular. And then in the West Bank, you have the Palestinian Authority, which is very unpopular. Even if we were to remove the Israeli occupation from this, it's very hard to find a way to think that there could be a unified Palestinian state at this point when you have such political, really political distrust, political hatred amongst Palestinians for these groups, but also with these groups on each other. Obviously, Hamas and Fatah, they don't get along whatsoever. They hate each other. And it's no secret that Palestinians are very divided themselves on what they actually want. Some people want the one state, some people want two states, some people want whatever state they can get. Ultimately, it's very difficult. And what you saw in Jenin was an attempt of an uprising. But obviously, as we've mentioned many times, the people in the West Bank have very little power. Obviously, almost no military power whatsoever, no weapons to support themselves. Meanwhile, settlers in the West Bank often will carry Uzis on them. It's a complete disproportionate, relationship when it comes to the strength that both sides have in this. But, you know, we talk about Syria and whatnot and the optimism that has come from a lot of Syrians. And that to me is kind of where I get my optimism from, because looking at the West Bank right now, I actually think at times I'm more concerned about the West Bank than I am Gaza, because at least with Gaza, I believe that there could be some power that comes in for temporary governance. I don't even know if the West Bank will, exist really. I think the line has already been basically erased so much between Israel and the West Bank that who knows with a ceasefire what that means, if that perhaps means giving the West Bank almost entirely to Israel. I think that we're going to be seeing that line, practically erased, and it's very sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Like the conditions in West Bank, it's yeah, people, obviously people romanticize, Palestinians, like 48 Palestinians living in Israel compared to
Yeah.
Gazans. People romanticize like the West Bank compared to Gazans, but you can't put it on a tier list. It's like they've
Yeah.
each got their own individual like
Right.
issues. And I think the number one like biggest common thing that I've noticed is like, man, even in the West Bank, like you can't just call the police like to help you
Yeah.
defend yourself from a settler, like from any settler violence. Like the Palestinian Authority, that's not what they're for, they're there to suppress
No.
you
Right.
too, it's like everybody's
Mhm.
against you, even your own government who maybe in
Right.
other situations, like they would be your representatives or they would be the ones that are trying to help you guarantee your security. But Palestinians
Right.
are robbed of any kind of ability to defend themselves, whether it be even through the powers that are supposed to be administering their security forces, which is something that Syrians have always felt as well. Which like we've always felt like Assad was in power to suppress any Syrian resistance, to suppress any political Syrian identity. On behalf of Israel, like Israel didn't need to kill Syrians. He was already doing it for them and carrying that out for them.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just a harder like connection to make with a lot of people, and they don't understand that. And but yeah, like a lot of the
Right.
protests in 2011 were talking about how he's an agent of Israel and how we
Of
want to
course.
free our brothers. We want to do like be able to like do political activity. That because
Right.
you could be arrested even for advocating for Palestine and not saying a word about Assad.
Of
Yeah, I
course.
mean, he was one of the most brutal dictators when it came to Palestinians in the Middle East and suppressing their rights, committed a massacre in Yarmouk, right? He has not been pro-Palestine by any measure. And the Arab Spring as a whole was to a degree a pro-Palestine movement, right? It wasn't just Syria that had pro-Palestine marches, and Egypt who had pro-Palestine marches. A big issue many Egyptians had in 2011 was the peace deal between Egypt and Israel. And it didn't take you long to hear protests in favor of ending the current agreement, the current status quo. Jordanians have very similar sentiments. So this is not just isolated to Syria. This is a broad Middle Eastern issue that many dictators across the Arab world definitely suppress.
And they who ended up overthrowing the Arab Spring leader, that is Morsi, is
Yes,
Sisi, and he's like very friendly with Israel. And like
Of course.
chief
Morsi was,
of
as far as I understand it, like he's part of the same party as Hamas, right? As
the
Muslim
Brotherhood.
Brotherhood, right? So it's like
Yeah,
Brotherhood.
this is what was the goal of the Arab Spring, is to have some kind of like alliance that could actually bring together whether it's diplomatic or actually like violent, and we can have
yeah,
like conversations about like difference in tactics. And you were talking about how Palestinians are divided on one state, two state, anything we can
Of
get. And for some people, it's also violent resistance and peaceful resistance and
yeah.
diplomacy and this,
Right.
like it's like a
Of
very
course.
yeah like complicated issue in terms of tactics.
Yeah, I mean, that's a
Yeah.
very fair conversation. I personally, am someone who's participated in nonviolent resistance. I'm not someone who would personally feel comfortable with violent resistance, but I do recognize international law. Under international law, Palestinians who are occupied have the right to resist both violently and non-violently. And especially when you take away any other means of resistance, you're going to expect violent pushback. If you look at Gaza, there was something called the Great March of Return, when hundreds of Palestinians went to the Gaza border to basically champion the right of return to their homes that they were taken from in 1948. Completely nonviolent, not a single utterance of violence, a very peaceful protest. Israel killed hundreds of them, sniped them, shot kids in the feet. And these people were not Hamas. These people were just normal, everyday Palestinians who are not even politically affiliated. So, in a political situation, when nonviolent means are usurped from you, yes, sometimes you do have to devolve to violent means. That's what happened in South Africa. That's what happened across the world in many decolonial struggles. This is a norm. And even Israelis did that. The group Lehi, the terrorist organization, right, under British occupation, they devolved to violent means against the British. So this is something that Israelis probably should understand better than most. And it's very ironic that they seem so dumbfounded when Palestinians do resort to violent resistance.
Yeah, I'll add
But yeah,
something real quickly, I guess. I want to say, you know, it's ironic, I think, because again, in this case with Palestine and Israel, I hear from many Israelis and many pro-Israel activists the idea of peaceful protest. And listen, I should clarify, I'm not a supporter of terrorism. I personally believe, killing any innocent civilian is horrifying. And so when the October 7th massacre happened, and I saw how many innocent people died and were killed, I was very taken aback. Even if I understand the reasoning for wanting to break out of that, I mean, terrible blockade and siege that was put on Gaza. Again, that's a day where it was an act of terror, and also an act of resistance. Two things can kind of be true at the same time. What I have an issue with, though, is when you hear Israelis, condemn groups like BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanction, which is absolutely a peaceful form of protest, and yet it gets, I mean, in the U.S. it gets punished. I mean, literally free speech laws that actually make it punishable to participate or to coordinate with businesses that have participated in BDS or just in general anti-BDS legislation. Again, it's boycotting certain products. That is absolutely a form of peaceful protest. To weaponize that, I mean, you're giving the Palestinians no other options,
yeah,
and it's really sad to see that. I'm somebody who is I actively do participate in BDS. I do my best to boycott many Israeli products, and it's not because I hate Jews or I even hate Israelis, but it's because I don't want to be. It's the one of the very basic ways that I can show my support for Palestinians, and so I will go out of my way to buy Palestinian owned products and whatnot because I
Mhm.
want to support not just my people but the people who have been suffering so much. And to think that a movement like BDS now gets it gets shunned and people get so upset at it again. Well, you can't have it both ways where you oppose the October 7th attack and you also oppose BDS. Now
Exactly.
it's obviously just complete hypocrisy. And so again, I'm not somebody, I don't like the terrorism. I don't like killing anybody. I think that Hamas obviously has plenty of corruption by the leadership. But again, when you look at the people, man, and they're suffering, I just don't know what other options you can give them.
Exactly.
yeah.
When they try the Great March of Return, as Elijah mentioned, when you have people advocating for BDS, at the very least, if violence occurs, then obviously the people of Gaza shouldn't have to face collective punishment for that as well.
Yeah, and I want to add a quick distinction before we move on to the next topic, because under international law, there is a distinction between terrorism and resistance. Resistance is solely dedicated to occupational and military infrastructure. So if you kill or target settlers or IDF soldiers, that is different than targeting civilians, right? Why Hamas, what they did on October 7th, would fall under both terrorism and resistance is because people under 18, not IDF affiliated, were killed, but there were many people in the IDF who were also targeted. So while we should condemn any killing of innocents, right? Under international law, resistance, not terrorism, resistance is legal for an occupied people, which the Palestinian people are.
Yeah. Um, and it's interesting watching like how nuanced the debate is among Palestinians, like even for something like the pager attack or the October 7th attacks, like
Yeah.
where the lines get blurred
Mm.
and like there are some legitimate targets or whatever, but you also know that like it there's a lot of innocent people that were caught up in everything. And yeah, no, of course it's in the eye of every Palestinian, like up to them how we go about it. But when we started the Arab Spring, like we wanted governments that could at least like have us like let us hold that discussion or like because there's a lot of Palestinian communities in Syria, there's a lot of Palestinian communities in Lebanon, there's a lot of Palestinian in every Arab country basically. It's literally a freaking diaspora.
Yeah.
And so but we couldn't hold those kinds of spaces. And I wish for a fact like I wish in fact like in 2011, a bunch of Muslim Brotherhood governments got into power, like just swept power, and then we could have like by now we could have been resisting those power like those governments by now, and could have been even more advanced in the cause, like because everyone's gonna let you down
Sure.
eventually.
Yeah,
But I think like now we're just in Syria, we're just getting at the point that we should have been in 2011 if Assad had just rightfully stepped down in the first place, like he should have. Um,
100%.
and yeah, now it's like we're just gonna see, we're just gonna see, and hopefully like it doesn't go the Morsi route or something like that. But um,
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, I would hope not. Yeah.
is
I
It's
would
Egypt
easy to be
add,
pessimistic.
everyone
it
just
is easy to
something
be
to say?
pessimistic.
Okay, you go for it, Elijah.
Okay, I was going to say, I think I'm a little more optimistic about Syria. I don't think we're going to go to Egypt route. There are still some Assad-backed individuals in pockets here and there, but I don't think they have any institutional capacity to overthrow HTS or the current government. I think that's out of the water. One thing I do want to see come out of Syria, like you said, is a vibrant society that allows for discussions such as these, that do not try to suppress any dissent of unique ideas in society. And even with a group like HTS, they've shown that they're relatively liberal on this issue. You don't have to be an Islamist to be in this society, right? They're trying to intentionally show that if you're Christian, Druze, Jewish, we don't care. We want you in this society participating politically and having discussions not only about Syria but the wider region. And I hope it stays that way. I think it will. Not to support Western efforts, but it seems like they are also trying to make an effort to be more democratic, more pluralistic, in order to reduce the sanctions that Western countries are still upholding from the Assad regime onto HDS to see if they get a little more progressive. So I am very optimistic. I think that Syria is trending in a very positive direction.
I want to say, yeah, I'm optimistic for Syria itself. I should clarify. I'm optimistic for Syria because, I mean, you just toppled now, one of these leaders, and not just him, obviously, but his father and their legacy and whatnot, a power that had been put in place that felt so, I don't know if the word is untouchable, but just it was such a harsh mountain to climb. And the fact that it
Yeah,
happened and happened so swiftly, sort of, it brings so much joy to me to see, how many Syrians are returning, for example, and who have been just celebrating this. And, again, this kind of, I think, also comes back to a conversation about people in the West, for example, because unfortunately, Elijah and I know some people in the West who were actually upset about the overthrowing. And we immediately heard, oh, it's Western backed, it's Israeli backed, Jewish. I mean, there was also, there were a lot of conspiracies being made. And, we can get into the weeds of how true that is, about how, what role the West played. But this idea that Assad was, anything but a brutal, just dictator to his people and to the region,
yeah,
um, it's whitewashing this. Obviously, I've been very critical of Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, and obviously he's a war criminal, just like Vladimir Putin is, and just like Bashar al-Assad is. These are individuals who all should be condemned. So I think I don't know if it's just a lack of education by some people in the West, but I think there's the idea that you know I think there's the idea that Arab equals Muslim equals resistance equals leaders, and then thus you have to support like the Syrian leaders, who obviously in that case we're talking about Assad in the stuff that they did. And so that, to me, I'm very encouraged that that Syrians have been able to kind of reclaim themselves now. And Palestinians, it's just so tough because it just feels like everything's against them right now. Obviously, their own government, doesn't seem to care for them on either side of the aisle, really, even if you claim to fight for them. And then you have the biggest obstacle in Israel, which is just this dominating force, which is backed by the West and the United States. And I'm going to be very curious to see under the Trump administration how the Abraham Accords get extended with Saudi Arabia and other countries. And from then on, I don't know what the future really looks like. I'm optimistic, but I'm not optimistic how a lot of people are. They think like a Palestinian state is going to happen. That's not what I believe will happen. I think we're going to need a lot of reform, and it's going to be a lot of societal change that Palestinians will be able to do within themselves to be able to gain even more support from the international community
Mm.
and ways that they can actually topple over. I mean, it is like this David versus Goliath sort of structure here. I mean, they are very
Really.
much the underdog against Israel and in many cases their own government. So we're gonna have to see, I suppose. But
There was a
yeah,
moment where I remember like Biden was talking about like officially creating a two-state solution. Like I don't know where that fell apart or what stopped it, but do you guys remember that at all? Like maybe
Yeah.
8 or 10 months ago, there was
Yeah.
actual serious talk about doing it.
Yeah, and Blinken reiterated the same thing. I mean, Obama also said the same thing during his tenure about the need for a two-state solution.
Trump did the same thing. Bush did the same thing.
All of them did. It's a platitude of
You
American
know,
leaders. Yeah, they can say we want a two-state solution without doing anything tangible to implement it. If you truly want a two-state solution, you know what you have to do? You have to call for the expulsion of 800,000 settlers in the West Bank. Biden never did that. He will never call it a dismantling of settlements. That'll mean you basically have to overthrow the entire settler infrastructure in the West Bank. That's impossible. And also, you have to create a contiguous state between the West Bank and Gaza. Is any American leader willing to carve out a chunk of Israel to make that happen? No way in hell, right? It's impossible. I think most Western leaders do understand this, but they want to simply say, "Oh, we support a two-state solution," just to keep the ball rolling, so they don't have to address it. Act like the progressives support a fair solution for both peoples. In reality,
Or
it's
kick the
BS.
can down the road. Yeah, I get like no,
Exactly.
I totally get that, but I just thought like yeah, there was a moment where they were like yeah, like Mahmoud Abbas will be the president of the new Palestinian state or something like that. But I guess yeah, it was just smoke and mirrors.
right? No, I
Um,
Yeah.
mean, yeah, the Democrats especially will do this, right? They'll play that. I mean, Trump didn't really hide it as much. I mean, Trump did try to say that he cared about Palestinians. He tried to say it. I mean, but this is also a guy who, when he recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, he actually said that it was beneficial also for Palestinians that he did that. I mean, that's the sort of reasoning we're talking about. I mean, this, we're very much stretching what it means to be like supportive of Palestinians. They all say that for a two-state solution. A two-state solution, they all know it's impossible. The West Bank is split into about 160 different islands that are separated from one another. The Gaza Strip is completely destroyed. There's no way to connect the two territories. And obviously, no Arab countries also want to step in and try to govern or help administer any sort of facilities there and for the Palestinians. And so it's just, it's very sad. Kamala Harris said, the same stuff. Palestinians deserve dignity, sovereignty, statehood, stability. And I don't know what that means. What does that mean actually? And so Trump, listen, if the West Bank gets annexed, it's going to suck. But I also think there's a lot of Palestinians who are like, it basically already is a part of Israel. I mean, like they don't feel like they're living in Palestine anyway. And so I care about, at a very baseline, I care about my people being able to live. And that obviously begins with a ceasefire and hostage deal with, inshallah, we get that very, very soon. We might be on the brinks of that in the next 24 hours or so for a final deal. But after that, will the UAE come in and govern Gaza? Will there be some sort of Arab coalition that governs Gaza? Will the West Bank be put under certain protections? I don't know. And my fear is that when focus begins to move away from Gaza, then Israel will really be able to close in on the West Bank. And I think that it could be very successful if Israel chooses to do that. I don't see how they could be stopped, really.
Yeah, and Jadd's also historically correct. I mean, the main reason why Israel under Sharon pulled out of Gaza in 2005 was twofold. One was to redisperse IDF soldiers to the West Bank so they could prepare for annexation in the future, better protect settler infrastructure, but also to allow Hamas to govern Gaza, to be a more extreme actor that would give them justification to further suppress the Palestinian people. In contrast to the moderate PA, where it's really hard to hate the Palestinian people when this group that's basically subservient to you is ruling over the Palestinian people. But I think Jadd hit on a few very key points. And one of them, going back to the two-state solution issue, is that even under Oslo, there was never an authentic attempt at a two-state solution. Under Oslo, the Palestinian people were deprived of very basic statehood institutions. One of them was the military. Palestinians had to be demilitarized. I don't know any state in the Western Hemisphere, in the Eastern Hemisphere, that is deprived of a military and still considered a state. To me, that's more on par with the Kurds in northern Iraq, right? They have like some regional autonomy, but they're heavily suppressed militarily. That's not a state. What Oslo can see was not a state. They don't even get full control over their own territory. Parts of the border, the Jordan Valley would be under Israel's control. That's not a state, right? That's complete BS. And any subsequent president has never tried to go beyond what Oslo advocated for. So to me, there's never been an authentic attempt at a two-state solution. Um, In terms of Trump coming back into power, I mean, like Jadd said, you really have to stretch the definition of pro-Palestine to consider him to be a pro-Palestinian president, right? I don't think that there will be any pro-Palestinian measures he ensues. I think he will likely recognize Israel's annexation, at least of Area C of the West Bank. I'm not sure when that will come, but I'm pretty confident that with Pete Hegseth, with Marco Rubio, a cabinet full of Israel supporters, that is an inevitability. But I
Mike
do not.
Huckabee,
Wait, sorry, Judd.
Mike Huckabee
Mike Huckabee
as
too.
well.
He an individual who
I said
refuses to
Huckabee
recognize.
as well.
Yeah, yeah. Mike Huckabee, a person who refuses to acknowledge Palestinians even exists. He refers to the West Bank by the biblical name of Judea and Samaria. This is a man who says there are these are no settlements, these are communities, right? This is a crazy individual who is leading the foreign policy for Israel as the head diplomatic mission to Israel. So it's a very bleak future for Palestinians. And I think, and Jad was touching on this, Palestinians already conceive themselves to be part of Israel, right? They believe that there's one state from the river to the sea governing the territory, that's Israel. So it's Israel in everything but name. And by Israel annexing, they're just officializing something that is not already official. And so for many Palestinians, this won't be a drastic change. And in fact, I would hope one day that Palestinians would be able to get political rights because with demographic trends, Palestinians would have voting rights in that state. And that would lead the way for a one state equal society for all if that ever does come to fruition. So many Palestinians say annexation is not the worst. It could be the darkness before we get brighter. And so I'm not someone who's necessarily opposed to that either.
Yeah, and I want to say the PA is already so corrupt where it's like, I mean, it already feels that Israel controls the West Bank. And Elijah's right. There are some Palestinians who are just like, you know what? I know annexation is going to come. My goal is that, we'll be able to have some sort of recognized rights because, my fear is that Israel will basically say, Palestinians, you can stay, but you're going to be more or less squatters on your own land. You're going to not have voting rights. You're not going to be citizens. Because when we talk about a Jewish majority, it's important to remember, you know, at least in my eyes, it's not as important the amount of Jews you have on the ground versus how many Jews are turning out in the voting booth, because that's ultimately what's going to be important. You can't, the second you include the Palestinians, can you imagine an Arab leader in Israel, how that would, how that would go over in society? I mean,
This is
that's
all
what's going to be very important,
so
right?
out of the realm of existence because they would never put like Arabs and
Of
Jews in the same
course.
playing field to even
Yeah.
compete in the first place. Like they would make sure it's like rigged like heavily in their favor so that they could,
Right.
if they even ever considered like giving Palestinians voting rights, like they already. They like they're a sizable 2 million Arab like minority. They like that number. They want to keep it that way. They get mad that even
Well,
that 2 million
yeah.
is procreating.
Imagine already the disenfranchisement that occurs. I mean, it's
Exactly.
already, and so it's just I think about it, and basically Palestinians they kind of already are. What I tell them is what I tell people is Palestinians are residents of Israel, while the Israelis are citizens of the country. I mean, that's really what it is, right? Palestinians technically, I mean, it's interesting, right? You literally in a lot of Palestinian homes, you can look over with your own eyes and see Israeli flags of people who are living in your land who can vote in elections, who can walk on all the roads and ride on all the buses, and you can't even do that in your own part of your land. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
There's a lot of
but I mean,
dissonance.
we gotta be hopeful. So, gotta be
Sorry,
hopeful, inshallah,
gotta be
right?
hope.
So,
No, because you can't do anything but hope, man. Like literally 2 months
have to.
ago, the 2 months ago, I
You
didn't
know what?
see. Sorry, go ahead, go
You know
ahead.
what I want to say? I mean, think about this: the Jews for 2,000 years lived in diaspora for the most part from their homeland. I always hear this from my Jewish individuals who are pro-Palestine. And so it's possible. And what you saw with
Yeah,
what happened in Syria, it was
Exactly. Like
possible.
it was the pure distillation of that phrase that like some things just like sometimes decades happen in a week, or be realistic, expect a miracle.
yeah,
Because miracles just once in a while they just freaking happen, man. Like, I don't know. Yeah, just overnight crazy things can happen. But like, even 2 months ago, if you had asked me, I never saw any future for Syria. I thought it's over. Like, I'm never gonna see my home
Mhm.
again. Like, I was very comfortable with that reality, and
Yeah,
uh, and thankfully I
right.
was wrong, and thankfully like a lot of us doomsayers were wrong, and thankfully a lot of the end of world like doomsayers that thought that once he was toppled, like everything would go to hell we're also wrong. Like so far so
Yeah.
good. It's not like total chaos. It's not, there's been, incidents, but it's nothing like systematic. There's no insurgency, counterinsurgency. And like you said, yeah, like you don't foresee like a someone like within his authority overthrowing him or something like that. And hopefully like that's we stay the course there.
Amen.
Right.
And
Amen to
I would,
that, for sure.
yeah, well, amen to that. And I would also say, one thing that's like really captured my mind is in this future reality where Israel does hypothetically annex, and hopefully we can have a struggle. Palestinians will transform from, say, a national struggle to one of civil and political rights, right? And from there, you
Right.
can potentially have one state. And then the question is, what would that one state be, right? What would that conception of an identity for a state with two peoples, roughly equal identity, equal population size, what would those be? And so that's something I've really tried to wrap my head around for a very long time. And you can't have, as with Israel, a Jewish exclusive state that has to come at the expense of Arab Palestinians. You can't have an Arab Palestinian exclusive state that comes at the expense of Jewish individuals. You can't have a mono-religious state, whether that be Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, because the other two groups will typically feel disenfranchised by that. And so to me, the only path forward is for Jews and Palestinians, and honestly, the wider Levant, to conceive of an identity where we are all full and equal participants, where we don't conceive of ourselves as others anymore, but as one family, as brothers. We can debate what that identity is, and there's a few identities. One I'm very partial to is the Pan-Levantine identity. It's gone by many names in the past. One of them is the Canaanite identity, as it was expressed by some Jewish intellectuals in Israel. Aton Saada, who I'm not a fan of, but he was the leader of the SSNP and did believe in a Pan-Levantine state. He conceived of that state being just one of Greater Syria. There have been various thinkers in Lebanon who have also come to this conclusion, and it seems like it's the only indigenous ideology to evolve from every Levantine state, but it's never been implemented. But it has been the only identity that's arisen in Palestinian society, in Israeli society, Lebanese society, Jordanian society, in Syria. And to me, that would be so beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And the way you do that, like various thinkers have articulated, we do share one land and we have common roots. If we can go back to what unites us, that is the political path forward. And that's why I think I'm very partial to that identity. And I think many youth are, especially as well. For many, historically, in the 1940s, when the mandate system was ending and various Levantine states were getting their independence, it was very odd for many why, say, southern Lebanon and northern Palestine were two politically separate entities, right? These two groups under the Ottoman period always interacted. There was these national differences were not a thing. Most of them were Western backed, right? The border between Israel and Lebanon, the border between Lebanon and Syria is completely Western drawn, right? What is a state like Lebanon? It was something created by the French to basically give Maronites a majority identity state. And these are completely Western conceived ideas. In the Levant, historically, this has been a place of cosmopolitan coexistence, and I would love to return to that through a unified identity. And so I think going forward, I would love to see discourse bring back this idea as very viable. And to
Mm.
me, it's something I would fully back for sure.
And a lot of people have this aspiration of
I'm
still
with
committing to that mandate
on that.
system.
Yeah.
Like yeah, like France wanted to also do the same with the Druze. They wanted to also do the same with the
Yeah.
Alawites. They want like and now like people like a lot of Kurdish nationalists also want to do it with the Kurds. Like I understand that they were suppressed to have their own state. But I think like more and more splitting up based on ethnic or sectarian lines is not the way to go. I fully agree with you. Like the Pan-Levantine movement is what unites us more than it divides us, in my opinion. But we do need like countries to actually form an idea of a civil state first, because
Yes.
our ideas of the state are very warped in Syria, in Israel, in Palestine, and Lebanon too. It's like a super sectarian system there too. And I don't know like too much about Jordan, but I think they've probably made the most progress in having like a civil union where like everyone considers each other like equal citizens.
Yeah.
There's no like separation based on ethnicity or sect, and like
Right.
we'd have to all like all four of us, if you want to say like Palestine and Israel are one,
Yeah.
we'd have to have like a civil state so that we could even like negotiate,
Yes.
a union, or like, just better ties that give us free movement, like, because that's what we really want. Like a lot
Yeah.
of Syrians are related to Lebanese people related to Palestinians. Like, just we're all related to each other, and we'd all just love to be able to have freedom of movement. And you bring up like the splitting up of with Sykes-Picot. There was also a survey taken called the King Crane Commission. I forget
Yes.
what year it was. You've heard about this. Yeah, so they
Yes, I think
surveyed
it
the
was in
population.
1915. Yeah, 1415. It was basically the US coming in and surveying all these different groups about what political solution would you want. And it's so ironic because they were going to Palestine and Palestinians are saying, we're Syrians, right? What distinguishes us from someone in Damascus? And that was a very high sentiment. But nowadays, it's inconceivable that that was even a thing. But yeah, the US proved it. And the US did that to go around the British because the British were trying to implement all these sectarian states in the region to continue their divide and conquest mission. But the US said, no, we rather just have self-determination for whatever the people want there. The US was a much better actor back in the day, but sadly, not anymore.
Yeah, and that commission also like just went completely went completely ignored too.
Yeah, the UN did not acknowledge it. It was done during the League of Nations, but I do think the U.S. tried to resubmit those findings to the UN, completely ignored it, and just basically let the British system prevail. And sadly, that's the current system we have today. Jordan, Israel, Palestine are both Jordanian creations in terms of the borders, the divisions.
I mean,
Lebanon and
British
Syria are
creation.
French. Yeah, yeah. They're completely. I mean, look at Jordan, right? The Hashemite ruler was taken from Hijaz and placed in Jordan and said, "You're ruling," because the British were partial to them.
Right.
Israel Palestine was the concept of partition is a British idea. It goes back to 1936, actually, even before 1948, where the British basically had a solution that said these two people can never coexist and live in one state. We have to divide them. And in 1948, the UN adopted that mission and there was a vote. And by majority, most states said, we do want partition. But even then, it's ironic because most Zionists will point to the fact that Israel accepted partition and Palestinians did not. It's true Palestinians said no, because why would you? You've lived in this historical territory for generations. You would not be either a minority in a Jewish state or be cut off from the rest of the territory if you were in the West Bank and Gaza. But Israel on paper accepted, but in practice they did not. And the reason I say that is because the partition plan was not a two-state solution. It was a confederacy. And so when you're talking about freedom of movement between these different states, that was actually the UN proposed solution. But Israel never accepted it. They never accepted the economic union that the UN said to do. They never accepted the freedom of movement partition within the partition plan that the UN said to do. So it's very ironic overall because Israel didn't accept it either. And I think personally going forward, what I would like to see is something based on confederation first and foremost, right? You're not going to be able to dissolve these states overnight. Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine will continue to exist, but a basic guarantee you should give everyone is freedom of movement. Allow the people the same right they had under the Ottoman period to be able to live in Damascus, to get tea in Beirut, to have dinner in Jerusalem. This was a commonplace notion back in the day. And sadly, it's been completely repressed ever since the European powers came in and divided up our territory and restricted us. That's more in line, I would say, with like Nasser's conception of pan-Arabism. He conceived of these different states, but allowed for a confederation model based on freedom of movement, shared foreign policy, shared economics. Michel Aflaq in the Ba'ath was more of the one who said, no, we're one state, one Arab identity, right? There will be no political divisions. I think in the Levant that is possible over time, but you can't start there. You have to have something like freedom of movement with these different states, and then from there, get on to potentially having one common identity.
Yeah, maybe a currency, and then like, yeah, slowly,
Exactly.
like, yeah, that'd be dope. Yeah, so Jad had to leave. Sorry for the because of technical difficulties, so we're cutting it a bit short, but I hope you guys enjoyed our first episode of whatever this is gonna be. But yeah,
Yeah.
Elijah, yeah, you just had one more thing you wanted to add quickly about Levantine, the topic on the
And
like Pan-Levantine movement and the SSMP.
yes, yeah. I do want to share a little bit about the history of the movement, specifically as it pertains to Syria. I mentioned in my previous answer a bit about a figure, Aton Saada. He was born in modern-day Lebanon, but he was really politically active in Syria, born to a Christian family. But he was really one of the founders at least within in Syria and Lebanon, of the Pan-Levantine identity. He called it the greater Syria or greater Shami identity. And I want to preface, he wasn't necessarily a good guy, right? As a Jewish individual, specifically as someone who has Shami Jewish roots, we were brought up to know that he was actually very sympathetic to the Nazis, right? He had this really warped idea about Jews being foreign to the Levant, which is really weird because Jewish identity started in the Levant. So that's a really weird position for someone making a pan-Levantine identity. He was very sympathetic to Hitler. He made many statements in support of fascism at points. Not a good guy, right? Not a good guy. And it's no mistake that Assad's father would become one of the leaders of the SSNP, and that whole political party would follow suit with Assad and continue all the way until his overthrow with all that's currently happened. So there's a lot of stains that have marked Syria's attempt at making a pan-Shami or greater Levantine identity. But I believe that shouldn't stop individuals from trying to seek out a political party based on this ideology. One very salient and very ahead of his time position that Saada did have, despite all his faults, was the notion of territory, not race, not religion, not ethnicity, but territory unifying a people. If people reside in a territory, they will become meshed essentially into one people. And he viewed the Levant as a very natural piece of territory. In the south, it's kind of cut off by deserts, both to Arabia and to Egypt. And then to the eastern portions, there are mountains that cut it off from what was historically the Mesopotamia region. But in the Levant, right, it's very, very enclosed, right? It's a connected piece of territory where everyone historically could move.
Mhm.
And it's very salient that of course the people in this place of land will have similar cultures, similar aspirations. They developed in the same piece of territory. They didn't have the borders we have in the current day. People just moved throughout the Levant. It was a very natural piece of territory that allowed for natural freedom of movement. And I believe that is very strong political impetus to create a state around. As we were saying in my previous answer, Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Palestine, these are products of Western intervention, Sykes-Picot, the mandate system. These are not natural to our region. Let's
Mhm.
go to a solution that is natural for our region. And I
For
think
sure.
that is the Pan-Shami identity.
Yeah.
Jews, Palestinians, Lebanese people, Druze, Sunnis, everyone in this group shares roots with the Levant in some way, shape, or
Mhm.
form. Let's go back to an identity that unifies us, and that is Pan-Shamism.
Yeah, and it's actually very natural to a lot of the Muslim population too, because in the Quran, like the region is not mentioned as Syria or Lebanon or Palestine. It's mentioned as Bilad al-Sham,
Exactly.
which was what like the word Levant was, I think, made up by France or something, to
Yeah,
describe the lands of Sham.
yeah,
Which like and the Bilad al-Sham I think includes like Aleppo, Damascus, but it also includes Amman. It means like Jerusalem. These are Bilad al-Sham from what I understand. So this is like a very natural idea like of a community of like a shared nation. And yeah, and I hope it would spread like to Turkey becoming Anatolia again, and like Iraq becoming Mesopotamia again, and this could like partially resolve like the Kurdistan crisis, which w they would be like integrated into like whatever the regional makeup and the regional territory kind of already naturally creates, right?
yeah.
Um, and yeah, so like you don't need to redraw borders. You work off of what you're talking about. I think like it's a regionalist approach, and it's yeah, it's much less forced than trying to like to just draw borders and say like this sector, this ethno nationality should have its own country. These are like very simplistic like ideas that like colonizers make up and think that they're going to be like good solutions when they usually end up with just a lot more strife. Um, but yeah,
Amen.
if there's anything else you wanted to add,
I mean, you hit the nail on the head, man. I think Europeans exported their experiences and the fact that Germans and Italians and French people couldn't live together because they had a language barrier and exported that to the Middle East and said every group with a minor difference, whether that be religious, racial, linguistic, cultural. Like we need to make sure these groups don't interact. They definitely can't live together. It's even ironic because, and this is a story of the late Ottoman period. There was a Jewish banking family from Damascus by the name of Farhi, and the Palestinian leadership at the time brought him in to solve an economic crisis. But Europeans writing of this individual, Haim Farhi, they were pissed. They said, "Oh my God, these how could they bring in a Jew to do this?" Right? They were exporting European anti-Semitism on the region. So it's a lot of the ills you see today, whether that be the animosity between different ethnic groups, whether that be the political strife. A lot of it stems from European colonization, and we have to find a solution that goes back to our roots before the era of colonization. And that's another reason why pan-Shamiism, I think, is above and beyond every other political ideology we currently have, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah,
All right.
so thank you guys for joining us for whatever this will become. Hopefully, we're thinking of spinning it off into an extended series about like just Levantine politics and with the aspiration of advancing this idea. If you like it, please subscribe, like, comment, share, and let us know if you even want to be on the show, if you have your own thoughts to talk about it. And yeah, thank you guys so
Yep.
much. Peace.
All the best. Peace. Have a good one.